This is episode 298 of the Rio Grande Foundation's Tipping Point, New Mexico. I'm Paul Gessing, president of the Rio Grande Foundation, New Mexico's free market think tank. You can find out more about the foundation at riograndefoundation.org. I am very pleased to be joined this week by attorney Ana Garner. She has been litigating civil cases in New Mexico for 40 years. On December the 21st, 2020, her team of 3 attorneys filed a 125-page case against the New Mexico governor and public health directors for violations of constitutional rights as a result of the government's response to COVID-19. She's been very active in attempting to hold New Mexico's powers that be accountable for their actions in the COVID situation. And she is working with an organization called New Mexico Stands Up, which is nmstandsup.org. Welcome to Tipping Point, New Mexico, Ana.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, so you're an attorney and you've been here in New Mexico for a long time as a litigator. And we're definitely going to talk about some of the legal challenges that you have filed and your team has filed with regard to the governor and the public health orders. But before we get into all of that, why don't you just kind of update us in terms of where things stand from a legal perspective with regard to COVID-19. We've had a constant change in the public health orders, but early on, especially, and it seemed like there was a flurry of economic activity, judges were extremely deferential to the governor, and she's been able to keep an iron lock grip on things. How do you see this situation at this point?
Well, it's looking more and more dire the longer that this, quote, public health emergency continues. There's so many damages being done throughout our economy, throughout the population in terms of suicide rates, drug abuse, alcohol abuse, domestic violence. It's been really devastating. I mean, it's not very difficult to see that everything that was fun or that families could do together and that sort of thing, for example, movies or bowling rinks, there are a lot of things that got shut down merely because they're fun. And that's part of the psychological warfare that we're enduring right now. It really is a psychological psyops operation to try to completely destroy our will to be able to even stand up to this level of tyranny.
Yeah, and I certainly share your thoughts in terms of the situation having gone on long enough, and that it certainly, if it was ever necessary, it shouldn't go on any longer, and it's been going on for much too long at this point in terms of any person. Of course, in this case, the governor having such total control over New Mexico. But can you talk a little bit about the laws in place that allow the governor to have this kind of control, and where you think some of the challenges are? And then we can talk about those specific challenges. But talk about the legal situation in New Mexico and where you think the governor's overstepping and what we can do about it.
Certainly. As everybody knows who's taken civics or any sort of social history in school, know that there are 3 branches of government. We have our legislative, those are our lawmakers. We have our executive branch, that's the governor, and we have our judicial branch, and that's our court system. What the governor has done is to assume the legislative branch powers. Now, there is a provision in our New Mexico Constitution that allows the emergency delegation of powers from the legislature to the executive branch, because they want the governor can make a decision faster than convening a special session and that sort of thing. So that if there's something that needs immediate attention, the governor has the power to do that, and it's only in the face of a declared emergency. Typically, those emergencies have to do with wartime powers. We haven't really seen any governor before all of the COVID stuff happened where the governors seized simultaneously, with leaders all across the world, seized power and seized the legislative powers. And in fact, in New Mexico, when we had our general session here recently, one legislator attempted to introduce a bill which would give the power back to the legislature, and that was unsuccessful. It's a little puzzling to me why they would even be proposing a bill rather than just grabbing the power back. But there must be something there that I don't know about, and it's very possible. But I didn't know why they had to pass a bill for them to resume doing what they were elected to do. And that was take the power back. It's been long enough. The public health emergency is no longer a public health emergency. It's something that's gone on far too long to be resting with the executive branch at this point.
Well, I guess I would respond and say that they gave the power to the governor, and she certainly shows no signs of wanting to give that power back or give up that power. So the legislature has to do something to take that power back. And I guess passing a bill would be a way to do it. The problem with the legislation in the past that's created the governor's power in this circumstance is it doesn't have a time frame on it. There's no 30, 60, 90, or 365, for that matter, day limit on the ability of the governor to maintain control.
And that's correct. And there are those provisions in some of the state statutes in other states where they have a limited time frame. They didn't put that in our Public Health Emergency Response Act. She has exercised her powers under that act, under the Public Health Act, and also under the more general Emergency Powers Act. Those statutes are cited in most of the public health orders or in her executive orders. But the way I read these is one of those statutes doesn't even apply to this case. The one that's the General Emergency Powers Act appears not to apply. The Supreme Court may have already addressed that, so I may be disagreeing with what our Supreme Court has said. And you're right, the judges seemed, at least at higher levels, have seemed very deferential to the governor, and in terms of not requiring scientific proof behind any of these measures that are the responses, nor in having any sort of analysis about the risk versus the benefits of stopping these measures. For example, would we really have a higher risk of COVID if we weren't wearing masks anymore? And the general consensus among that is that masks don't do anything to prevent viral transmission. Viruses are too small. It's kind of like, putting up a chain link fence to keep a mosquito out. But the laws certainly under the statutes have allowed her to do some things. However, there is a provision in our New Mexico Constitution that requires when the governor does exercise emergency powers, he or she is supposed to call a special session within 7 days. That was never done. So we know that she has flagrantly violated some of our laws and our Constitution. This is not a lawsuit that we have approached yet, because we're in federal court and we wanted to do it under federal laws and under the US Constitution. We felt that because federal judges are not appointed by our state governor, but rather appointed by the president, who is the sitting president at the time of the United States, that we would have a more level playing field.
Yeah, so we've had some cases. Are you familiar with some of the cases that have gone to the various courts? And as you mentioned, they've been deferential, and kind of what I'm trying to get at is for you to kind of explain why your case is different, or your cases are different from things that have already been adjudicated, and unfortunately, by and large, found, like you said, the courts have been very deferential to the governor. So what should give us hope that these cases are going to come out differently? And so can you compare and contrast those briefly?
Certainly. And before we filed this case in December, we had watched the other cases in New Mexico very closely. I listened to all of the hearings that were broadcast by, I think PBS broadcast most of the hearings, the arguments that were done in front of the Supreme Court. And I had read some of the briefings. And the thing that struck me is that under these circumstances, we cannot concede certain things. And some of those things were conceded. For example, early on, at least, there were concessions made in court that there really is a pandemic, or there really is a public health emergency, or there really is a dangerous, highly contagious, very dangerous, virulent disease going around, killing everybody. So it took a little while for us to start looking at the data and following all of the actual science, as opposed to some of the what I would call fake science, which is very close to fake news. And that we saw that a lot of deaths were being coded as COVID caused when they were at best just dying with COVID. So we're not giving in or conceding to some of the points that had been conceded earlier. And one of those points was even a legal point, which was under what level of scrutiny is the court supposed to be looking at the responses to see if they're constitutional or not. And in the earlier days, several of the cases conceded that maybe it was rational basis. Well, we have 3 levels of scrutiny that go to the Supreme Court, US Supreme Court. And the rational basis, you pretty much will always lose because it's highly deferential to the responses that are being given by the governor. So there's hardly any justification that needs to be done by the governor if you're looking at it under a rational scrutiny type of test. If you look at intermediate scrutiny or even strict scrutiny, which is what we're alleging, then the burden is a bit higher for the executive branch then to justify some of these measures. So we have done that. That's one thing. We are looking at it as a higher level of scrutiny. We also are, in our minds, we feel that we are attacking the linchpin of this entire narrative. And the narrative is false. There's a lot of falsity throughout, but the linchpin is that the cases, the case numbers, and the death counts are closely tied to false positives of the PCR test and incorrect use of the PCR test. Those are the tests where they can either stick it up your nose, you can do a saliva test, but the PCR tests were never designed to actually diagnose a specific disease. It can, the way it works is it's an amplification, millions and even trillions of amplifications of a small amount of RNA or DNA, and they put a marker, like a luminescent marker in so that that can be seen if it's magnified enough times. And it's actually not magnified, it's amplified, it's exponentially doubles. So for example, if the labs are using a cycle threshold of 40, they have doubled that sample 40 times, which is about a trillion times in terms of the copies that are made. You make a trillion copies from one snippet of genetic material. And what has come out about this is that there was a study in France saying you should not even be using it higher than 25 because the results, the reliability results fall off dramatically after 17. And the other thing that's happened is even Fauci and the CDC and the WHO, World Health Organization, have all backed off the number 40 as the cycle threshold, saying that those are too high. And so now we're looking at much lower cycle thresholds that need to be run if you're going to have any reliability at all, and that's assuming that you exclude in those tests the presence of the other types of viruses that can also give you positive results, such as influenza, SARS. And so these tests have been the driving force of the governor's responses, unfortunately, and they are not reliable at all. So the more, when you test healthy people especially, which they call us asymptomatic if we're healthy, right? If you test healthy people, you will get a far, far higher false positive rate. So all of these cases that are being, you know, the numbers that we see flashing on the highway signs, or that we see the governor give when she gives her press conference, those numbers are fake. The actual number is probably about between 5 and 7% of the numbers that they're broadcasting in our faces all the time through mainstream media.
Before let you go on, we're not all lawyers here, and I'm not a lawyer, so I'm not sure about the strict scrutiny, moderate scrutiny, and I think there was another one. And then briefly talk about the you implied that replication, or the way the tests are done. Just put that into some plain English for our listeners.
Okay, so the test takes a little sampling of material from the back of your nasal passages, very far up, and then it, runs it through a machine. The machine it's called cycle threshold, so that's an amplification cycle. So if it's an RNA, because it's a virus, it's RNA, which is one strand, not two strands of a DNA. So they have to double it right away. And so it's a doubled strand, so it looks like a DNA fragment. And then that is doubled again. Each one is a cycle. Each doubling is a cycle. When they get positives, a high number of positives, it's because they're running the cycles very, very high. And they're running them so high that they cannot possibly even give meaningful information about who really could be a case or who could be infected. So they've blurred the words, the terminology of what a case is, what an infection is, and even what a COVID-related death is. And that's been intentional. So everybody is scared out of their minds about this disease that's, just a little worse than a bad flu season in terms of its actual numbers.
Okay. And the scrutiny issue, legally speaking, I'm at a loss. I don't know what the strict versus moderate versus the other. I think there was one that you mentioned.
Rational basis. Yeah.
Rational basis.
So
yeah.
It's a very complex test that's done with the courts. And it's so complex that our law professors could argue about it ad infinitum. But the main point that I wanted to make about it that's more understandable to people is, at what point does the defendant have to justify her actions? And she doesn't have to justify them at all, pretty much, under a rational basis. If there's any reasonable relationship at all to anything, any kind of justification, she wins. It's a very low standard. If it's strict scrutiny, which is supposed to be applied whenever there are fundamental constitutional rights involved, and we know what some of those are: the right to free speech, the right to exercise your religion freely. I would say that a fundamental human right is the right to breathe air unimpeded, and that hasn't actually made it into the Constitution in those exact words, but I think that is a fundamental human right, to be able to breathe oxygen, not our waste product of carbon dioxide. So if it's a fundamental right that's being infringed, the court will apply a strict scrutiny, which means now they've got to justify it. It has to be more than just a reasonable, belief in something. It's got to be a higher level, a higher bar that they have to reach to be able to justify that. So that's why I'm saying that we're asking for a higher level of examination of the responses and the relationship of the responses to the purported reason, which is to flatten the curve, right?
Okay, fair enough. That's good explanation. I get it now. So real quickly, what is Stand Up New Mexico, or New Mexico Stands Up? What is the organization? Are you the one that set it up? Just can you talk a little bit about what the organization is, and then we can get into the legal issues themselves.
Sure. New Mexico Stands Up is an LLC, and it's owned by me. We are supported by volunteers and donations only. So any of the cases that we bring on behalf of the people that we're bringing them for, they don't pay us as clients. So we don't charge our clients. This is supported by donations. When we filed our case in Doña Ana County, we were absolutely just so amazed and blessed to have so many donations come in that more than covered what our original budget was. So that's now allowing us to go forward with other cases as well. And this is really good because these cases will benefit all New Mexicans in one way or another. And that's how we're doing it.
Okay, so you have the one case, and then you have some others that you're either working with or you've filed. And I know that from what I understand, there's some folks looking for plaintiffs potentially for other cases. So let's go through the specifics, and maybe if you can explain a little bit of the arguments on the ones that you've already kind of filed, and where you think where they're going, because the legal process is complicated for even the most knowledgeable people, let alone folks who don't follow it on a regular basis.
Well, they are somewhat complicated. I told you we had 125 pages filed. We had something like 325 footnotes, scientific footnotes, and authoritative footnotes. But that first case is challenging the state of the emergency. It's the one that we filed against the governor and the public health secretary. So if there is no state of emergency, all of the responses and mandates and executive orders and public health orders that have been handed down are void and of no effect, because there's no public health emergency to support that. So we challenged the public health emergency on the basis of the PCR tests are not a reliable indicator of a case or an infection or a death at all. So if that falls on the ground as the basis for the entire basically fearful and false narrative, then we feel we should win. We did talk about in our lawsuits that there is no really asymptomatic transmission is so rare as to be pretty much non-existent. And we cited the almost 10 million person study that was done in Wuhan, China, concerning asymptomatic transmission. And they found zero cases of asymptomatic transmission from sick people, so sick people got other people sick, but nobody who was asymptomatic got anybody sick. So an asymptomatic is defined actually as someone who gets a positive PCR test, but they never have any symptoms. Well, that's a healthy person that got a false positive, really. That's what happened. But we challenged it on the basis of the PCR test. We challenged it on the basis that the responses are causing more harm and danger to the population of New Mexico than the disease itself. And we have numbers to back us up on that. And then the other part is, how dangerous is COVID really? It is dangerous to certain populations, just like every year the seasonal flu will unfortunately cause deaths in older people, fragile people, people with pre-existing lung disease, diabetes, obesity, heart disease. So if you have coexisting problems already, you are more susceptible, of course, to a serious outcome with COVID. And even the CDC did some studies on this and found that of all of the deaths that had been coded as being deaths from COVID, only 6% of them had no comorbidities, meaning that really probably only about 6% of those deaths coded as being COVID related were actually COVID caused. And that's a significant number. So in that case, the wheels of justice don't always move as fast as we wish. And a motion to dismiss was filed based on jurisdictional grounds. We didn't file it. It was filed by the defendants. And that's been fully briefed. And we are waiting for a decision from the court right now. In the meantime, we have filed another case in Doña Ana County. I believe that was filed February 28th. And we have just filed the amended complaint in that because circumstances changed. We only had one plaintiff, Isaac Legarata, and he was a detention center corrections officer in the detention center in Las Cruces in Doña Ana County. And he refused to take the vaccination when it was mandated by the county manager for all first responders. A lot of them did take it, and only very few of them actually had any sort of exemptions. And we wanted to try the case with somebody who had no exemptions, who didn't declare that he had a medical or religious exemption. We wanted to try it solely on the issue of, does the federal law preempt any state or local agency from being able to mandate this experimental product? And we say, no, it doesn't. The FDA rules saying that experimental products must be, you have to tell the recipient of all of the potential risk, as well as informing them that they have the right to accept or refuse the experimental medical intervention. So people are not being informed of that. They're not being informed of the very serious side effects that we're seeing a lot of across the world following the administration of these shots, typically following the administration of the second shot. So we amended the complaint to add another plaintiff and change in circumstances for Isaac because he needed to leave the job. It was no longer safe for him. He was facing a hostile work environment, and he found another job. So we did add some more counts, and one of those counts is retaliatory discharge under the whistleblower statute, and another one is crimes against humanity. And we were able to bring in the Nuremberg Code of, against human experimentation, and that any medical intervention requires full consent. The person has to give full informed consent before you can require them to take, well, you can't require them before they have to take anything, before they take a drug or a jab or even a mask. The mask wearing for virus transmission, the PCR test, and the shots are all only allowed under the emergency use authorization. They're all investigational, experimental. So people don't have to do any of those. The employers are trying to tell people, well, if you don't have the vaccine, then I'm going to have to make you have a PCR test every single week. Well, no, you don't have to do that either, because it's experimental. And it is invasive. They stick it up your nose far enough, they can actually give you a brain infection. And that is a side effect of sticking something that far up your nose. You're very close to the brain. And if you go just a little too far, people can get bad infections that can actually travel to their brain. So there are—
So your one of your lawsuits that you are working on deals with regular people who have jobs and not making them, or the employers attempting to make them be vaccinated or get tested on a regular basis. Now, is that the same or a different lawsuit? Well, it looks like I'm seeing an email that I received from Sarah Smith, who runs New Mexico Freedom Alliance, the Free People of the Southwest, and she wrote in an email that she's working to find plaintiffs potentially for mandatory testing and masks imposed on New Mexico teachers and then another one on school children, which seems a little bit more general. But are those separate lawsuits or related to what you just told me? Because obviously teachers versus the general workforce is a little different issue.
It is. It's a different issue if it's a public employer like APS or the county, of Doña Ana. It is a little bit different case because the federal laws are very clear about preempting state laws and county mandates. Whether they preempt private employers from doing it is another issue. We are working on some cases that we feel will clarify this issue one way or the other, and that is for small private employers who are also mandating it, mandating the shot. We're getting ready to file one of those in the next couple of weeks, probably 2 or 3 weeks. We're looking at the case against mask wearing for children is a little different. In that one, the inspiration for that case came from a Weimar family court in Germany who granted injunctive relief, meaning they said, you can't do this anymore. You can't make kids socially distance and wear the mask all the time. It's child abuse. And it is child abuse. I know that well-meaning parents don't want to abuse their children, but they're ignorant. They just don't know. A child's developing brain is even more sensitive to neurological damage if they have to wear it 6 hours or 8 hours a day in school. So there are many neurologists, pediatric neurologists who are willing to testify and help us with these cases. So we're going to be filing it for the children under both the EUA as well as child abuse claims. And that's what we're looking at. For the private employers, it's going to be a test case because it's not really well settled about whether a private employer can force people to have this experimental shot or not, or at the cost of their job. So we don't know yet. We don't know how that might turn out.
How about kids wearing masks in outdoor athletic events? We've had young people have serious health issues running cross country. My daughter is in a golf camp this summer, and unless something changes yet again, which we certainly hope with the governor's order, she's going to have to play golf in a mask for no good reason. And especially the outdoor thing, especially with the CDC hasn't necessarily said this because the CDC is, of course, very politicized, but other scientists, including the New York Times, have said that outdoor spread of COVID-19 isn't really a thing. And yet we are holding children to wearing masks in outdoor competitive sports, many of which are more physically exerting, let's say, than golf. As much as I love golf, running cross country is certainly a much more challenging workout from a cardiovascular perspective. So are those issues that you're looking at, or are you collecting plaintiffs for lawsuits on those kinds of issues?
We are. And I was inspired because several mothers wrote me and said, my child is an athlete at this high school or this middle school, and that he or she even should have a medical exemption because they have asthma or they have some condition that would warrant a medical exemption. As we know, doctors are very reluctant to give medical exemptions because they have bought into this narrative and for some reason are supporting it. Maybe there's some financial incentive, maybe their employers are putting pressure on them, but as a practical matter, it's very difficult to get a medical exemption. We have kids who have passed out after running, and when they came to, they were throwing up as if they had, concussive type syndromes. So it's very alarming, and these kids are breathing super hard when they're running, when they're doing anything, and they're breathing back in their own carbon dioxide. And that leads to a high level of carbon dioxide in the body acidosis, which lowers your immunity system. It's a terrible thing for your health to be breathing in your own waste. This is carbon dioxide is a byproduct of metabolism that is a waste product to humans. If you're a tree, it's good, but if you're a human, you need oxygen. So we are gathering people who are very concerned about their children and the long-term effects of damage to their growing brains.
And before we move on, it would be wise to point out that your organization, New Mexico Stands Up, you're a 501c3, right? So you're
we're not.
No,
we're not a 501c3.
Okay.
We have a sister charity organization who can umbrella us, and we would do that for certain very generous donors who want that sort of tax deduction. We can do that, but most of our donations are the bread and butter between $5 and $50. And we get quite a few $100 ones as well, $100 to $500. But we every once in a while we'll get a nice 4-figure check. But most of the people are just sending us what they can, and and that's gone a long way towards helping this endeavor for sure.
Okay, but my point is that if you want to be a part of some of these or one of these lawsuits, there's nothing out of pocket for the individual or their family. You and your organization, on the flip side, are collecting money from people who are concerned about these issues and want to help crowdfund these litigation, these lawsuits. And so you need folks to go to your website, nmstandsup.org, and donate. And there's a button to do that, correct?
Yes, thank you. And there is. And
okay.
We gratefully receive donations. We couldn't do this without the generosity of the people. And we get donors from not just New Mexico, but all over the country. So that's a surprising thing.
Yeah, and there is a national kind of effort under the banner of Stands Up, and it could be New Mexico. I know you're involved with, or there's folks in Ohio working under that banner. Are those the main states that you're active in, or are there other states where folks are involved with this Stands Up effort?
Yes, we have Maine Stands Up now. We have Kentucky Stands Up. Those two attorneys, very, very smart attorneys, are working with Tom Renz and me and Jonathan. Jonathan Diener is my co-counsel here in New Mexico. And Missouri Stands Up has recently, is going to be filing a lawsuit, I understand, soon. We have, I found a New York Stands Up, so they've already created that organization. So some of the states are starting to create those organizations so they can attract attorneys. And also Tom and I have made a commitment to helping other attorneys in other states with our pleadings, because you don't have to reinvent the wheel. You can use what we've already started with and improve on it and go with in your own state. So it's not only a national effort, it's actually an international effort of attorneys all over the world coming together, because this is happening in pretty much every country out there, with few exceptions. But it's happening in the UK, it's happening in Australia, New Zealand, France, Germany, Italy, Israel. We have a lot of people who are joining this movement. Not just as attorneys, but also volunteers and donors. And it's becoming quite widespread.
Yeah, now kind of let's take a step back. We just have a couple minutes to go here. And then I want to kind of get a broader sense of your perspective. You're not somebody who has been on my radar screen personally before. Of course, the legal profession and the policy profession are often like two ships passing in the night. Unless one is involved with the other, you don't necessarily know the names and players. Have you been involved in New Mexico public policy, political issues? Is this something that you just personally really got passionate about because you saw the infringements on our freedoms? What what happened to cause you to get to this point, if you will?
Well, I was probably the least political person you would ever run into. I wasn't loyal to either party. I was a registered Democrat, but I changed it at one point to an independent and changed it at another point to a Republican, because none of those parties really relate to me. You know, I'm not, so I'm a pretty nonpartisan person as it goes, really. And politics, no, I never wanted to do anything with politics. And I didn't really do that much with the legislature either. I was just in my own corner of the world helping people. But when this all happened and I started doing the research, and I realized that there was a lot of false narrative going on, and it also appeared from the research that this has been a plan that's been going on for a while. And I saw the abridgment of our constitutional rights. At that point, I started getting pretty hot under the collar. I was actually planning to retire, and I came out of retirement to do this because I lived a long, nice life and had a 30-year career, 40-year career, and it was time for me to retire. And I couldn't. I was watching what was happening. I said, I just got to do it. And, I said, it's just, I'm a solo practitioner. I don't even have any staff. I do a lot of the work myself, but recently we have a lot of volunteers who help me with legal research, other types of medical research. We have a lot of people helping us now. So that's what I did it, because I love our freedoms, and we don't have any right now. We've lost pretty much everything. And if we don't get them back, I don't want to live in this country anymore. May not be any different anywhere else, but a lot of people moving to South Dakota.
Right. Well, kind of with that, and kind of to conclude, Ohio, for folks who don't know, is a state where a Republican governor, DeWine, has been in office throughout coronavirus. Obviously, this is a state, New Mexico, where it's Democrat. Do you see this as an issue that it's really seemingly taken on some pretty partisan overtones? Do you think that the issue is that you need to, in New Mexico, we need to change our governor, or do you see this as a more just a loss of rights, more broadly speaking? This is just the latest brick in the wall, if you will.
Well, I do feel that we need to change our governor, but whether it's a Republican or a Democrat governor seems to make no difference in most of the states. If they have maybe, we have a few governors who seem to be standing up against this narrative, like DeSantis in Florida, Kristi Noem in South Dakota, the Texas Governor Abbott. So we have a few around who seem to be at least giving lip service to the fact that maybe we should be treated as adults, and we decide if we're sick, we stay home, and we don't need to wear a mask all the time, and we don't need to be getting tests when we don't even have any symptoms. How bad can a disease be if you have to get tested to see if you even have it? Well, that's because there's too many false positives. But it may be a political problem. It may be that our governor is not caring what she does to her constituency. And there are a lot of people in New Mexico who think she's a fine governor. So there's an agenda afoot, definitely. And she's grabbed it with, the biggest power grab of all, and doesn't want to let it go. So, it's similar in a lot of states. California governor is just as bad. Michigan governor, just as bad. So.
Yep. I totally hear you, and appreciate your time today, Ana Garner. And folks can find out again about NM Stand Up at nmstandup.org. You can find out about Ana's work, some of the lawsuits, how you can get involved. You can sign up for email subscription list to keep on top of things, and just a important effort. And I wish you luck, and let us know how we can assist you in anything, Ana. So thanks for your time today.
Thank you for having me, Paul. It was a pleasure.
All right. Thanks for listening to this week's episode. Find all episodes at tippingpointnm.com or at the Rio Grande Foundation's YouTube channel. Subscribe to this show at Apple, Stitcher, or have your Google Home play Tipping Point New Mexico. Thanks to Path 3 Marketing for producing this show.